This is the Weigh-In Podcast by Ben Chestnut and normally Sebastian Romero, but he will return at some point. So on this week's Weigh-In, we bring to you quite a few topics. The Birmingham coach steps down to run real estate, interesting. And another one is Jack's Forrest versus Vito Arujau. Do we think we could see another upset coming from you think we could see another upset and Vito not make the world team? There's that, and then I'm sure we'll find other topics in the course of recording, which always happens every epi. But nonetheless, let's get into this. So Birmingham, Kyle. Well, like I say, nonetheless, that is this week's weigh-in. Birmingham, Kyle Borchnoff is stepping down. I mean, not that to run real estate, transition to full-time real estate in Rochester. So that's a very interesting one. That to me is very interesting. But this and that was not even more of a huge topic. It was more just a quick touch. You know, I think we're starting. When I talk about the the young ones, and when I say young ones, I mean like those high schoolers coming up, making world teams and all of that, and this and that, and all of that. Um, they're really good because when you look at Jack's Forest, I think it is very well possible for there to be an upset. I think it's possible. We learned that from PJ Dukes with Yanni. So I think that there's, in terms of talking of this matchup being where it's at, being that it's to take place at Fargo and that has been set, I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to be interesting. I think everything in terms of the wrestling aspect of it is going to be great. And I think that's a good thing. I think for multiple reasons, that's a good thing. And I think when we talk about what's really good and what's good and what's not for wrestling, we kind of, that's something that gets across there as hey, this is really good for wrestling because for X, Y, and Z. And I say that because there are reasons there that are like, hey, this is really good, this is great, this isn't. It's terms and stuff like that where we say this is it's great, it's good and it's great for wrestling. And I think that having these outside matchups, I think it really works well because it kind of gives us that UFC style type of thing going on. And as we all know, that is what real American or uh I'll pull it up, as I always try to, but that is what we're real American. Yeah, what is it? It's real American freestyle. That is what that kind of is. That's kind of like that. That's kind of similar where they've got stuff where they're setting up matchups like that where they have Woods versus Caldwell August 30th. That's the things we're talking about. We're getting these things in wrestling that we've never really had. We didn't really have this, and I think will it be bigger than some of the things out there? Many will not agree with me on this, but yes, it will. The wrestling community is huge, and the wrestling community for years always loved MMA because that was as close as you could get to. Obviously you have Worlds, you had a lot of them really came up to this MMA. When you get real American freestyle off, and you get that off really well, and you get claw wrestling, that claw wrestling league down really well, you get claw going. Let me tell you, the wrestling community is going to change. I think you're going to see a lot of that. Those people that used to just be dead set MMA there's going to be a change in that. There's going to be a change in the almost of the guard here because you're going to have all these professional wrestlings that are coming up, and I don't doubt you're going to see more leagues pop up. That are going to be some more money flowing through them. Like, I'm not saying real American freestyle isn't, because they have a lot of good backing um in terms of that, and Claw's got good backing, But I say, somebody like, I say this in terms of like somebody like The Rock finally says, let me get on something. Or like a Brock Lesnar says, let me get on, they're really good designed, well leagues. And I think right now everybody's doing freestyle. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I know Claw is a mix. We broke that down on an episode. That's a mix. So I think that's a great thing. But I think there's a reason why you get record-breaking numbers at NCAA's, because the aspect of that folk style. And I say a lot of people like freestyle, and the reason why I say you get better, I feel like you would get better viewership in this folk, is because that overtime makes a difference. You have no overtime in freestyle whatsoever. Like, it's, hey, last point scores criteria, obviously what we learned from the Ramos situation. If you get 1-1 push out and your guy gets 2-2s, the 2-2s will win are better than 1-1. So, you kind of say, okay, there's no overtime. I think there's a lot of people that would say that Nicholas Suriano and Dayton, I think it's Dayton, but Fix, I'll say Fix, so I don't butcher the first name, Fix, versus Six was a good match. And I'm sure the most disputable, Jordan Oliver and Logan Stever. Now, I get Logan Stever, Jordan Oliver was not in overtime, but there have been plenty overtimes in college that we've been there and say, hey, we're going to an overtime. There have been really great stuff folk style wise, and like, even, okay, this will take you back. It's a good match. You can learn a lot from it. It'll take you back. Zane Rutherford, Logan Steber at Rec Hall. I think it was at Rec Hall. I'm gonna fact check myself on that one. But I'm pretty sure it was at Rec Hall. Logan Steber, and Zane Rutherford. If you have not seen that match, I'm not gonna say it's a true classic, but it's good. Like, there's a lot to learn from, and that was a young Zane Rutherford that went in there and did that, the way he did it. So I think that when you talk about that, yep, at Rec Hall. So when you talk about something like that and you say, okay, at Rec Hall, a monumental thing like that, that's really good. You talk about something that is like absolutely amazing, pure amazing, to see matchups like that. Where in terms of the matchups where it's like, okay, hey, we've now done something very well, and then to come in and be, because not a lot of times, and you know what, I think we're going to see this upcoming college wrestling season with some of those high schoolers. I'm gonna tell you exactly why I believe that, and why. Because look, they're making upsets on the world level, and a lot of them are doing really well on the world team level. The only one that I kind of say may not possibly be host of some upsets. I think we have to look at ourselves and wonder, if Bo Bassett wrestles. I think he's already done upsets very well, but I say this not in terms of Bo Bassett, but in terms of everybody. Once you've been figured out, how many times do you get beat? And I say this because there's a lot of guys that are senior level, not current world team members, but they got figured out and they got beat once again and again and again. And that's the difference. I say that because, in terms of like Roman Bravo Young, when he was wrestling, he was beating a lot of guys because he had them figured out quickly. You talk about why Austin Del Santos could never, beat the guys he wanted to beat, and that's because he got figured out. It's the same thing. If you haven't seen the film Vision Quest, Austin Dos Santos about beating Spencer Lee senior year, that's because he figured out Spencer. And that's some things where you look at that and you say, wow. But you say, is that what makes the day? No. I understand there are going to be upsets, but Bassett put himself on the market very early, wrestling a lot of those college opens. And the question here is like, hey, that's great, but like, do you get yourself figured out? Because you look at that in terms of you want to win national titles. And, I think I've said this on here before. I don't doubt that Bassett could become a 4-time All-American or at least have two natty titles. I don't doubt that. I believe he can do it. But what I say here is that the question that stays root here is, how early do you get figured out? Like we talk about like guys like Kyle Dake. Kyle Dake never really got figured out. I mean, yeah, sure, but he was a 4-time national champ at 4 different weights. So you say he never really got figured out. I mean, you could say, yeah, he did when he was a senior, after post-college. Yeah, maybe, but he was a 4-time national champ. He was never figured out. You think anybody that wins nationals 4 times was never figured out in terms of that national stage? Because, yeah, you can beat them regular season, but when you get down to NCAAs where it matters, that's the talk. So what we wonder to ourselves is, because this is going to be interesting, if they figure out that Nebraska team coming up, this year's team. I think that in terms of that, it's going to be interesting, because if you don't figure that team out, they very well are going to get another trophy. They very well are going to come out and they're going to get something. They're going to come away with some hardware. I think in terms of that, and Bassett's put himself in the light where he's like, hey, I'm the best. What anybody wants to dispute, that's up to them. But, he's top of the totem, in terms of my breakdown. So you say that, you put yourself that large up front. You put yourself out there so well, and then you make this, and then this big thing happens where now you decommit from Iowa. The terms here is really kind of cut and dry that, well, everybody's going to want to stop you because you're acting like you want to do what everybody else wants to do. Like, okay, like there's something you're missing now. I broke it down on that episode. I talked about the Bass situation that, if it was such big of a problem wanting to be in the wrestling club, why did you commit there in the first place? And, many reached out and didn't kind of agree with that. And I kind of told them it's an interesting point. You're going to a school and that's something you want to do, then you would say, hey, is this possible? I would have told him, no, we're not going to do that. And he would have said no. But the problem from that was they didn't see that everybody else was doing that till after everybody was doing it. They saw, they saw all these other guys going in there, and it just wasn't right. You had Anthony Knox doing it. You had all this stuff going on, and that was one of the things that was get going. In terms of Anthony Knox, now that we kind of touched Knox, apparently there has been another appeal filed where NJSIAA is still trying to prevent Knox that 4th title. But here's what I have to say about that. It's baffling, one, that you can't come to yourself. I know that there were some people that said, they went about this situation of, it's interesting what money could do, but I kind of look at it like this. These governing bodies have done a lot of things, and this is not the first time that a governing body has tried to do something. Let's all remember we've got NBA champion LeBron James when he was in high school. We're going to bring some basketball in it for you today. That when he was in high school, he actually was about to lose his whole season due to receiving gifts from people, and they were about to take his season away. And I understand everybody saying, well, that's not the same thing. He didn't get in an altercation, but no, it's a governed body that saw something and said, hey, he received a Hummer. I don't think his mom could pay for that kind of thing. And I don't think, these governed bodies have always tried to play law. They did it with him and it didn't work out. He was able to compete that year. He got a state title, and now you're turning around and you got NJSIAA pressing their luck with this Knox situation because they refuse to believe Knox to have a title. At the end of the day, he still got your placard or whatever you got, the medal or whatever you gave him for winning, and the bracket. You can't take the bracket away from him. He's got it. Can't take the medal. He's got it. So what are you going to do? Turn around and say, okay, he shouldn't have been there, and then now notice a new champion and say, okay, this is the state champ. He was, nah. I think in terms of what happened, they fumbled the bag on themselves. At the end of the day, you can't pick and choose when you want to use your rules only to benefit you because you want a different storyline. And I'm not saying that's not what NJSIAA has done here. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not disputing what they've done, and I'm saying this because I'm breaking this down in terms of just the interactions, the same way I did UNC, the interactions. We provided our opinion that was just, like I always say, disclaimer, this is just our opinion. This is not for you to go out and say, this is how they are as a whole or no, this is just, a little division, the wrestling side of division, and some of that higher up, but it's not to judge holistically. This is just a way in breaking something down. So we're not trying to say, what we're saying is just stuff that has happened, is done, widely spread across news outlets kind of thing. We're not breaking something down as what if they did this and that. I mean, I'm sure we have, but yet again, we'll give you the disclaimer. It is a what if, it is a this. But I definitely think if we roll back into what we're talking about, I definitely think in terms of that, it's like, hey, you can't shape a story the way you want. And that's the way it seems, because it all seemed like, whether it was or was not, what pieces of information were found to be true and what was not, it just kind of all sounded a little provoked and like, okay, this was like provoked and like, okay, we got him, now he's out. And and I say that because the campfire we talked about, the SpongeBob campfire, that's what I always call it, the SpongeBob campfire, where they're talking around the campfire, and as far as that campfire went, there was nobody really wanted to talk about what happened to those guys. It was, every story was about Knox, but nobody talked about what happened to those guys. And I'm like, if you're sitting here in a campfire and you're like, he's out, and you're laughing, and you're like, hey, he's not going to be able to go to Cornell. Well, first off, the kid is going to Cornell, so you're wrong. And I think in terms of that, I'm not trying to say one is wrong nor the other. I'm trying to say, if you're going to take the rules and slam them in one way, then you need to go and slam them for the kids that just are sitting there in the campfire. You got to say, hey, if you're making the example, you got to make it with everybody, not just one person, everybody. And it would make things differently. I think that would have definitely reshaped the outcome for them had they said, hey, no, the kids in the campfire, you are also going to be thrust out, because you can't do that. When you sit, laugh around and say, bye-bye, Cornell, you got to, and I don't say this, I know that everybody else has covered this, how parents should conduct themselves. No, we're going to talk about athletes right here. The athlete has to conduct yourself too, because you can't make one's wrongdoing a double wrongdoing. And I'm going to say that, I'm going to break it down for you guys, because many of you are going to say it's really confusing. So whatever happened with Knox, I'm not saying that what they did is wrong or not wrong. I'm not disputing that right now. We're saying one's wrongdoing. And I say one's wrongdoing as in, hey, one's mistake. Give or take, mistake, not mistake, but we're not disputing that. We've already, on that episode, broke down where we let loose about how we felt, and that's all there. So we're not going to touch that again, because that's a whole thing in itself. Okay, if one person does something wrong, okay, you don't go do something wrong too, and then say, okay, look, he should be out of here. He's gone. And then you're doing something wrong. And then quickly after, as you can tell, what the situation that went, when the video was posted, I guess whoever saw it told him, you got to take it down quick. It didn't go down fast enough. Copies of that rolled around very swift of what went on. You're trying to say that your school had no involvement and that this is the stuff that should happen. and then we're not hearing a statement about what you did to your own because he's laughing about something. So you got to kind of, if you're going to throw the book at one, you got to throw it at everybody. You got to say, hey, there's nothing wrong with explaining what happened to everybody, you know, but laughing about it and being like, this is great. There's a fine line. It's okay to say, hey, this is just what just happened. This is what just happened. But then going and turning it into a campfire where, you know, like you're, like I say, SpongeBob, they're singing songs, they're laughing around. You can't laugh around about somebody else's pain. It's just, it's not right. So in terms of that, it's like, hey, that's great. But in terms of, and bring it back in terms of, you know, the governed body, that the organization, yeah, had they, it would have gave them a different look. Had they said, yeah, that's no good. You can't sit there and say that. So you're gone too. You can't say bye-bye, Cornell. You're gone. Had they probably addressed everybody with the same demeanor, things would have probably been a lot different. And I get that you're trying to say, well, no, you know, something happened. They're just, it's frustration, but it doesn't matter whether something happens or not and something goes on. You can't then turn around and say, well, no, 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 no. You're only getting in trouble. And the others might have gotten in trouble. You know, I don't know. To this point, we're not contesting to whether they did or did not. I always say, Google it. That is, that's, I swear we got to have that on a t-shirt, the Weigh In Podcast. Google it. Because we always say that. Google it. You know, I'm not going to fact check that at all. You know, that's just something, you know, where we've always talked about the what if and the what not. And, you know, I say we don't really do that, but that's the only time we did. You know, you got everybody looking and saying, hey, you're trying to say Knox has done something bad, but you see all these other kids literally provoking him on video. And then you're like, no, they're not. And now I'm not saying they said that. They never said that. I'm just saying, you know, in the demeanors and the way, you know, we're kind of, from our point of view, it's like, hey, well, you know, because quickly after it surfaced around social media, you can't even find it on TikTok no more. And it's like, yeah, well, now you're saying, you can't, you got to take that down. Come on, come on. You can't, come on, you can't do that. And, you know, that can't be the only thing that happened. You say, all right, take it down. No, it's too late. You know, that's why every major outlet that had already saved it got their hands on it. And pretty much all of us that were media podcasts were all resharing it like, hey, no, 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 don't bury this. No, this happened. No. You know, I mean, there was a lot of, everybody was reposting all over Twitter and we had ours on Instagram. We were all, you know, we were all trying to say, hey, if you're going to use the book on one, hey, you got to use it for here too. We kind of were getting at that. And I think this is being dragged out, and I think they really still don't want it. But I'm going to agree with what some of the posts have said in accordance to that is, hey, you can't take away the bracket. Can't take away the medal. He got it. It's there. At this point, you're wasting governed bodies' money going back and forth to court for this. You're just, at that point, he's got it already. I can get, you want to take it away, you want to slash it, but he's got it. You know, that's like an Olympian that wins an Olympic medal and they get it stripped. It's like, hey, yeah, I understand you strip it. They're no longer an Olympic champ to record, but they still got the medal. They still there and they beat everybody else. Depending on what they got the medal stripped for. That is a whole situation itself. What they got it stripped for is something that we kind of would for sure look at and say, it depends on what they got it stripped for. But nonetheless, it depends on what it was stripped for. But if in terms of that, if it wasn't something that was crazy stripped, you know, something that was super crazy, but there are situations for that. I definitely think, you know, in terms of that, yeah. So is it getting a true colors moment? Yeah, it is. When, you know, it's a very well true colors moment because there were well on points made where by a lot of different governed members and fans. I mean, not governed members, but fans. That posted said there were so many situations where we sent stuff and did video and there was no action taken. Now all of a sudden in this situation you're left and right. I don't know what everybody's hatred is towards the kid. I don't know. I don't see anything wrong with the kid. He's a wrestler. He's good. You know, he put himself in the elite class that won 4 titles. at the end of the day, the way to stop somebody is not to go up there, cause a ruckus, and say, "Well, this didn't happen. He should be do." I'm gonna say this like clear coat, sugar coated, no sugar on it. Join a wrestling club. Get better. Go to camps, go to clubs, wrestle around, get yourself better. You get better and you beat them. Hey, nothing you can do about that. But that's not the case. Everybody's looking at it in so many different points of views, and I'm breaking it down as we're former athletes where we're looking at it from the athletic side of, hey, that's an athlete. Things happen. This is where things happen, and then we see a video posted about a campfire, and then magically it disappears, as in there they take it down, and we're like, well, you can't silence wrongdoing. You just got to address it. And I hope everybody takes that, in the best way possible. You can't silence wrongdoing. You have to address it. That's the quote of the weigh-in for today. You can't silence wrongdoing. You can't try to silence it and say, hey, take this down. It's one thing to say take it down, and then you say, hey, they got in trouble. There were repercussions, but at this point, you got to look at the stuff the way it is. No kid get that much hate left and right to do that, and you just don't want him to succeed. And in terms of Knox, I hope he goes down and gets 3 national titles. I mean, I understand many are going to look at me and say, you're putting it out there. I hope he gets 3. I hope he's a 4-time All-American. I'll say that. I hope he's a 4-time All-American. So everybody that looked and was laughing back at him, and I hope he becomes a couple-time Olympic champ and everything. So everybody's laughing back at him. That was laughing in his high school. He exceeded himself and did way better than they would have ever expected. And that's nobody's fault but your own. If you can't beat him, that's not his fault. He's good. It is what it is. This is coming from a guy that was not that top tier star varsity pupil. When you're that good and you get to be that good and people don't like it, sorry, it's called get better. I used to treat myself the same way. When I couldn't beat somebody, I said, well, let me join a club. I got to get better. I got to join a club. I got to get better. I have to get better internally. I have to get better with technique and wrestling wise. That's the way it is. At some point you got to say, hey, you just got to get better. You can't look back and forth at something and say, hey, well, can you do this? Can you do that? I'm just telling you, at some point I say you got to get better. And to see that this kid has shined on a nice level, to see that, what he's done post states and all of that, the things that he's done recently, you put a roadblock in the road, a fork in the road. This kid's just gonna break it. You can't do stuff like that. And I think as a governing body to still be going after it, it further proves it further proves a lot of points that this had nothing to do with upholding of your rules. This is about the fact that you simply did not want somebody getting a 4th. Because simply after he wins his 4th, you would have thought, hey, I'm done. I'm not going to keep going back and forth with this. This is over. You won, whatever, but next time, you release a statement, say next time, we're going to try to uphold our rules and whatnot. And to everybody that's on here, I'm sorry, this episode kind of took a turn. It was supposed to be more about, the upset of it could possibly Jack's Forrest pull an upset. And it kind of turned into a Anthony Knox talk again. I'm not disappointed with that at all. It is what it is. But you kind of see that they're still trying to stop it, and it just tells you, like, I just don't want to say the wrong words here. I just it just shows how much you're like still reaching and how much you can see clear as day how you see how you see the flat surface. Because it's like, come on. you're trying to add holes and bumps in it, but it's it's very seeable right now to what goes on, because you got to think about this, like, you're still trying. And I know a lot of times I relate some of the stuff to, like, hey, school, home life, or guy who gets that girl. Yeah, the word comes in mind, desperate. You just look so, it looks desperate that you're still appealing and appealing and appealing. And I say that because it's the same thing it'd be the same thing in a criminal case. When somebody gets, charged and you appeal, you're desperate. It's, you didn't do it. I mean, if you didn't do it, as they say, you didn't do it, you're desperate. You're like, hey, this is, you know we see that all the time where they're doing petitions to say, hey, this person shouldn't have been charged, whatnot. And when you look in terms of this, they look desperate. They're still trying. And I think, how long are you going to keep going with it? I don't know. How long till the court is fed up? I don't know. Court will hear any case. I mean, some cases, some stuff, it's what it seems like. But even then, it's just one of those things that I kind of look at and I'm like, wow. But like I said, it boils down to the same thing for me. Just if you take away the history, still got four brackets probably in his room. Still got four brackets up somewhere and four medals somewhere. You can't stop that. You can't. The video's there. He won a four-state title. Everybody clapped. The video's there. You can't stop that. That's not something you can dispute and stop. Even if you want to take it out of your history books, hey, that's just interesting. But I think in terms of organizations, I say, I'm going to say this real quick, that this is not just NJSIAA, because I'm sure there are tons. The NCAA has done things similar. They have been wanting to take eligibility left and right. We all know that there was a whole case on it, where they had to do a payout, I believe. It's just like, so I don't say this is just. I think it's just all organizations that they think, okay, we run this, we're going to do what we can do. And I think there are some things where you do have to have rules, and there are some ways where you say, hey, you got to look at the whole picture and say, you can't just say, okay, they got into an altercation at a high school. If we're talking in terms of that Knox, you got to look back and say, look at the bullying on social media. How long was this going on? Like, break that down and say, no, this plays a role. And if somebody's jarring left and right, this plays into it. It's important. You can't leave it out, and you can't say, well, no, you got to cite that as well and say, well, say, hey, if we suspend him, we have to suspend everybody in the campfire, because you can't. We got to suspend them for laughing around and doing this and saying, "Oh, this is great." We have to do that too. So that's how we just have to do it. Then you would look at that and you would say, "So you've messed it up." If that's in terms of the way it looks, you just wrecked that one, because now we can't do anything because we can't do nothing to you guys. So it's kind of how certain situations look. If you don't, when one wrong thing has happened, you don't go and do another wrong thing and just complicate things. But nonetheless, that is this week's weigh-in. Um, Another Knots talk. Um, it just kind of is something that comes up, through the purview, in terms of just everything. But I try to bring you topics. This is kind of where I say it's a little off season for wrestling. We're going to get a lot of good topics once Fargo gets going, because there'll be a lot of shocking stuff. So we'll be able to get you that good old Fargo episode, which will be nice to be able to break down that Fargo and and whatnot. In terms of that, you know, a lot of people have been reaching out saying we should draft for Fargo, and I don't think we're going to do it. I don't think we're going to do another draft for Fargo, because that would it's a lot of divisions, a lot to keep up with. So we only right now do our draft for NCAA wrestling. So in terms of that, we won't. But there was a lot of reaching out about doing a draft, and we probably won't for Fargo. I understand some people said it was fun to see what we did, but not for Fargo. Not for Fargo. So in terms of Fargo, no. But we will kind of do some stuff. But we will get an epi for Fargo. But nonetheless, we're in the end of an episode that I always feel like there's never enough time, but this one turned into a Knox talk because I ended up seeing that scroll across the, scrolling through Twitter and Instagram. I ended up seeing that it ain't right. It ain't right. Kid gotten already. Just let it go. Just let it go. I say let it go and refine your rules better so it can best fit the needs of how a judge looks at it, and then now, for next time, some things differently that you can do. I think that's the terms, but there really shouldn't be a next time. I mean, as school, I say as school districts and as everybody, you gotta hold yourself accountable. You can't let your kids come on and just start, bullying one on there. And I understand you can't keep up with everybody, but this just didn't happen one day. This is a pattern. This was happening over months and months and months. We can't do that. We can't do that. We just can't. You can't. You can't. You can't. And then you can't sit in the campfire and then be like, hey, you just can't. You gotta start saying, there's a level of sportsmanship you gotta prevulse with. If you don't like a kid, great. You don't gotta post about it. You don't. You really don't. But nonetheless, that is this week's weigh-in by Ben Rochester and normally Sebastian Romero. But he will return at some point. So with that being said, like, comment, subscribe, share, and that is this week's Takedown Thursdays. Weigh-in out.